So I'll take up the next para here. The Gita can only be understood, like any other great work of the kind, by studying it in its entirety and as a developing argument. But the modern interpreters, starting from the great writer Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, who first gave to the Gita this new gospel, this new sense of a gospel of duty, have laid an almost exclusive stress on the first 3 or 4 chapters, and in those on the idea of equality, on the expression kartavyam karma, the work that is to be done, which they render by duty, and on the phrase, thou hast a right to action, but none to the fruits of action, which is now popularly quoted as the great word Mahavakya of the Gita. The rest of the 18 chapters with their high philosophy are given a secondary importance, except indeed the great vision in the 11th. This is natural enough for the modern mind, which is or has been till yesterday inclined to be impatient of metaphysical subtleties and far off spiritual seekings, eager to get to work, and like Arjuna himself, mainly concerned for a workable law of works, a dharma. But it is the wrong way to handle this scripture. So here we have en passant a kind of a comment on one of the first modern interpreters, Bankim Chandra Chatterjee. You see, and I think it's from there that these two words, kartavyam karma, and this famous quotation, thou hast a right to action, karmanya vadikarastha. These two have become very popular among the Indian readership of the Gita present times, and we see it being quoted left and right by politicians and by scholars and by professors and by common men. That we must do our kartavyam karma, the work that has to be done. That means we must do our duty. So you see, this is how the Indian mind was influenced by the Western concept of duty, and Bankim Chandra was influenced by it, and he translated the Gita and focused on the Gita only upon these mainly upon these two concepts, upon duty, and that you have right to action but none to the fruits of action. But then this is, as Sri Aurobindo is telling us, in fact not the central teaching of the Gita, because for Sri Aurobindo, as we will see when we go along, maybe right in this chapter, the last but one paragraph, the most important thing about the Gita comes only in the 18th chapter, verses 64-65, but not before. So these are all necessary. This kartavyam karma, the duty, the morality, and then going beyond all that into a spiritual consciousness. All these are necessary preparations. But you see, just by twisting the meaning, the whole generation loses the meaning of the Gita, the inner meaning of the Gita. We all think Gita is a gospel of works, and Gita has told you to do your works and do not be attached to the fruit of works, etc. But the real message which comes in the end is not even focused upon, is lost. In fact, we read it over, we never really stop and halt and say what is the meaning of this manmana bhava madbhakta, which is supposed to be the message. So we don't go that far, we are stuck on this. So Sri Aurobindo is explaining, yes, it is the modern mind which is impatient of metaphysical subtleties. We don't want to listen to the philosophy that there is a psychic being within you, try to go into that Atman, that there is a Purushottama, that there are two Purushas, the lower Purusha, Akshara Purusha and Akshara Purusha. Just all that is philosophy, we don't understand. What we need is one little saying, hey, what am I supposed to do? Do your duty. Fine, sir, thank you, I'll do that. So we want a clear mental concept. We don't want metaphysical subtleties. So Bankim Chandra gave us this kind of a formulation which was biased, Western oriented. But that was the period when the West was coming into India through the British, and it suited well the Indians. to adapt to this new philosophy of Gita? Well, that is, in fact, he says, only perhaps we stop a little bit at chapter 11, the famous Vishwarup Darshan there. And I've seen some centers, they chant the chapter 11, that's famous because it is the darshana of the Supreme Lord. It's the vision of the Supreme Lord. Now, just during the break, normally we have a lot of business going on here, but there's a lot of gossip and some questions do come in. One person asked me that among the 3 stages, in fact, that's what I thought of taking up in the last paragraph, but I'll give you the question, but I'll give the answer in the last paragraph because Sri Aurobindo gives it himself. Now the question is that on what level was Arjuna, or to which level does Arjuna reach in his transformation? Because there are 3 levels that are talked of by the Gita: the doer, the instrument, and the ultimate realization. There is the Supreme Lord who is the doer. Did Arjuna reach the last level, or was he only the instrumental level? Well, a question that I'll answer, as I said, only in the last paragraph. But it's an interesting question because we should know, because I've been talking about the transformation of Arjuna. So he had a question, really is Arjuna transformed, or if so, to what level? Then we have, I continue with the next para, I'll come to the answer later. The equality which the Gita preaches is not disinterestedness. The great command to Arjuna given after, please see the word after is italics, so it's very important. The great command to Arjuna given after the foundation and main structure of the teaching have been laid and built. What is the great command? Arise, slay thy enemies, enjoy a prosperous kingdom. Has not the ring of an uncompromising altruism or a white dispassionate abnegation. It is a state of inner poise and wideness which is the foundation of spiritual freedom. So this is what is supposed to be. That means what I was emphasizing here, Arjuna before and Arjuna afterwards. Arjuna before is the mental man, but Arjuna afterwards, he has the foundation of spirituality. So he says, because of this foundation of spirituality, he has achieved an inner poise and whiteness. And at that level, at that point, Shri Krishna says, arise, slay thy enemies. So it doesn't seem to be altruistic at all, that don't kill human beings, it's sin to kill, etc. Now he says, slay thy enemies and enjoy a prosperous kingdom. You see, again, you live in this life, take a kingdom, enjoy it. So it is not any kind of an ascetic ideal that you leave the world. So you see in this single line, arise, slay thy enemies, and enjoy a kingdom. So this is the fullness of life. You are here, you are a spiritual person, and yet you have the material wealth, material enjoyment. You are not a poor beggar in this material world. With that poise, in that freedom, we have to do the work that is to be done. A phrase which the Gita uses with the greatest wideness, including in it all works, sarva karmani, and which far exceeds, though it may include social duties and ethical obligations. You see, when we think of this, kartavyam karma, do what is to be done, but it doesn't mean you reject a few things. Because in the name of religion, in the name of ethics, in the name of morality, we reject a few things. But here the Lord says, sarva karmani, you have to do all types of works. What is all those types of works? You must continue with your social duties, you must continue with your ethical obligations, you continue with your dharmas, but what is happening? that you are untouched by them. In fact, Sri Ramakrishna gives a beautiful example that the boat floats over the water. It moves over the water. It does not get it doesn't get sunk in the waters. So we are similarly in the waters of this world, but we can move upon these waters like the boat, untouched, and not really leaking and not succumbing to these waters below. So you see, where the waters don't come into the boat, that means you are floating over all these problems. And yet the boat can move. So similarly, Sri Krishna says here, that you do your duties, but do your works, but from a heightened consciousness. So it is not duty on the mental level, but duty from a supra-mental level. So here we will see the whole attitude changes. It is no more, the level of the consciousness. It is something, what we say here, equality. What is the work to be done is not to be determined by the individual choice, nor is the right to the action and the rejection of claim to the fruit the great word of the Gita, but only a preliminary word governing the first state of the disciple when he begins ascending the hill of yoga. This is a very crucial sentence which normally we don't take into consideration. That is, what is the work to be done is not to be determined by the individual choice. You say, I want to be a doctor. But the parents say, my son should be going to the IT into America. My parents say, I should be an engineer. So it's the parents and the teachers and the relatives who influence the child to become what they want him to become. That is the whole fallacy of this education. Somebody wants you to become something for their own ego satisfaction, saying in the name of, saying, after all, you are my daughter, you are my son, we wish the best for you. But thanks, parents, you wish the best for me, but you don't know what is best for me. You think sending me to California into that Silicon Valley is the best thing, but that could be the silliest thing for my soul. So we don't know. So therefore he says, that is, we do not know our choice. But what is the way to know? What Sri Krishna would later on give as the Swadharma. See your own nature. Your own, not the intellectual talent. There is a tendency of nature. And this tendency of nature should guide you to what you want to become in life. This is what is going to come in the future. Now at present we are so much on the mental level, so much on the pragmatic, materialistic level, that we want our children to succeed. Success is the only yardstick of really measuring my child's growth. Has he become an IT man? Is he getting 30,000 or is he getting 3 lakhs a month? We have become so much, dogmatic regarding this success and the money, that we are ruining souls, millions of souls. So what they have come for, alas, they don't even look into what they have come for. So this is how, he says, we are really ruining a whole generations have been ruined. But now, second one, nor is the right to the action and the rejection of claim to the fruit the great word of the Gita. You see, normally we quote this couple of things, kartavyam karma, then this question of your right to act, your rejection of the claim to the fruit. That's what our great Bankim Chandra has said. He says, as we are saying, they are not the summum bonum of Gita. They are important as the first state of the disciple when he begins ascending the hill of yoga. And perhaps we should put in a parenthesis here that Gita is speaking all these things not to the common man, please remember. It is for the aspirant to a spiritual life. You see, every man who knows the Gita, if he starts quoting, he'll make a mess of his life. Because then he will come into great confusion about the duties. Lord Krishna is telling Sarva Dharman Parityajya, whereas my school is saying, no, follow this rule. My headmaster says, do this. For a common mentality, as the mother beautifully said, if you are interested in that, her very beautifully she says, at least I'm going to give, if you want to build hospitals, schools, you may do it. If that makes you happy, so much the better for you. It has not much importance. So millions of people, if they want to do this, go to Silicon Valley and all that, go. If that makes you happy, go ahead. But if you want a change in your life, if you want to ascend the hill of yoga, as Sri Aurobindo puts it, then the Gita comes to you as a guide. And it's a marvelous guide, a very practical guide. It takes you up. And that is what Mother would tell us even for integral yoga. You don't have to take up integral yoga. Whoever said that? You're not forced to take this yoga. If you are happy with your life, get going. But it is only when you have an inner disturbance that something is missing, what the mother says here. That something is missing in my life. All is well and yet all is not well. That is the time when the first spirit of yoga comes in. Otherwise, touch wood, thank the Lord. Lot of people have all the comforts, a good bank balance, a lovely car and a lovely house and 3 servants at home. Apparently nothing going wrong. Well, God bless you. And maybe you'll spend this life without even thinking of God. God bless you. But fortunate are those in whom the disturbance comes. Not in everybody's life this kind of a disturbance will come in, this kind of a confusion, this kind of something missing comes in. So until that something missing comes, you'll not look for that something missing. So those are those, if I can use the word, not in the biblical language, it may look religious, but those are the ones on whom the grace comes in. The grace touches you somewhere and disturbs you. And once you experience the touch of the grace, then you start feeling the missing. That everything is good. And yet I'm not happy. Happy externally, your parents may, why is it, son, you got everything in the world? Yes, mommy, I got everything, but still I'm not happy. So that I'm not happy, why you don't know? But that's the beginning of yoga. So Sri Krishna also, when he says that, it is all for those who suddenly switch their lives and say, all these days I've been living, as Sri Aurobindo and the Life Divine would say in a very dramatic manner, a worm's life, crawling in the mud of the earth. The worm is really happy. Or what has been said, a pig happy and a Socrates unhappy. Socrates is dissatisfied. So when that Socrates dissatisfied comes into you, then begins the yoga. Otherwise, it's like the pig satisfied is going around eating, sleeping, enjoying getting fat. You get the disease, you come back to dieting and all that. That is the normal life. So we must remember that Gita is given for those who get the dissatisfaction and then are looking for something. That's why the importance of the word, that there is this hill of yoga who start climbing that, then the first steps of the climbing are this, that you have the right to action, you have the right to action. What is the quotation here? Thou hast a right to action, but none to the fruits of action. When you start the climb, the first step, Gita says, is take care. You do the right action, but forget about the fruit of it. Are you ready to take it? Well, that's the first step. It is practically superseded at a subsequent stage. For the Gita goes on to affirm emphatically that the man is not the doer of the action. It is Prakriti, it is nature. It is the great force with its three modes of action that works through him. And he must learn to see that it is not he who does the work. Therefore, the right to action is an idea which is only valid so long as we are still under the illusion of being the doer. It must necessarily disappear from the mind like the claim to the fruit as soon as we cease to be, to our own consciousness, the doer of our works. All pragmatic egoism, whether of the claim to fruits or of the right to action, is then at an end. So this is these steps that he's telling us, which he will summarize in the last chapter as a last paragraph, that you think that you are the doer. The first stage is, we are all in the first stage where you say, I am the doer. Fine. I am the doer. Who is that I? The ego. So the ego is the doer. That's level 1. And 99.99.99 humanity is at that level. Then you would say, as we said, start with the doer, fine. But if we add this dimension of offering to the divine, the doer slowly transforms himself into the instrument. Because he realizes, because this is a strange psychology, that the moment you connect yourself with the divine by this bridge of offering, then what happens? The divine starts coming, crosses the same bridge and comes into you. So the bridge between you and the divine is called offering or surrender. And you walk across the bridge to the divine, and the same divine walks across the bridge into you. So as the divine fills up your being more and more, the I, the ego, disappears more and more. And then you begin to say, oh, I thought I was the doer, but now I realize I am not the doer. I am only an instrument. Who is the doer? Prakriti is the doer. Nature is the doer. There is a greater force beyond me. So there is the doer, and then he says, we lose the illusion of being the doer. That's the second level. When we say, I am only an instrument in the hands of the larger forces of nature. And then this question of claiming to the fruit of action, that also becomes less. When I say, look, I'm building this project, I want this fruit, I'm planning this, I'm looking for the fruit of action. But that is because I'm thinking I'm making it. But if you say it's the divine who is doing it, the doer gets the fruit of the action. So here, if I am the doer, I get the fruit of the action. And also remember, I get the reaction of the action. It's not just whatever I've envisaged will be what I'm getting. I may get disappointments, I may get failures, I may get slaps, I may get every kind of thing. Because I am the doer. But the moment the doer shifts into the divine, the divine says, I will take up the fruits of the action. Be it suffering, be it sorrow, be it good, be it happy, I will absorb the whole thing. You don't. I protect you from all that. Because now I am the doer, I will take care. Well, that is the reality, but it's psychologically within us that the shift takes place. And therefore, you would say that all pragmatic egoism, whether of the claims to the fruit or the right to action, is then at an end. There's a second stage where we realize I am not the doer, the divine who is the doer. Then you see, you unburden yourself into the divine lap. So you are quiet, you are at peace, your life is smooth. I mean, it cannot be as smooth as possible in this world of forces. But still, the anxiety, the burden of your growth, the burden of your enrichment, everything belongs to Him. Next, But the determinism of Prakriti is not the last word of the Gita. The equality of the will and the rejection of fruits are only means for entering with the mind and the heart and the understanding into the divine consciousness and living in it. And the Gita expressly says that they are to be employed as a means as long as the disciple is unable so to live, or even to seek by practice the gradual development of this higher state. And what is this divine whom Krishna declares himself to be? It is the Purushottama, beyond the self that acts, not beyond the Prakriti that acts, foundation of the one, master of the other, the Lord of whom all is a manifestation, who even in our present subjection to Maya sits in the heart of his creatures, governing the works of Prakriti, he by whom the armies on the field of Kurukshetra have already been slain while yet they live, and who uses Arjuna only as an instrument or immediate occasion of this great slaughter. So this is the third level. First level doer, second level instrument. But in the instrument level, you think it's Prakriti which is doing, it's nature. You are not brought in the God yet. Because you say, well, you see, I have done this, but I had no control over this. That there are forces that have guided me, or the circumstances that have guided me, that have compelled me to do. You begin to see that what you are planning is not happening. Something else is guiding you, something else is forcing you. In spirituality, we may say is a presence, it's a divine hand. So all these things we make us to think that I am in the hands of Prakriti. Prakriti means not just this nature, but a higher force. The third level that we are discussing here in this paragraph is that all this is a process. The doer, the instrument is a process, because we are not capable of leaping to the third level, which is when we realize that there is only one consciousness, that of the Purushottama. It is that Purushottama who is Prakriti. It is the same Purushottama who is within me. So actually, who is the doer in this world? There is only one man who does it, one person who does it, the Purushottama. The whole fallacy, in fact, what I was telling you about in the Mahabharata, the story also in the Upanishads, the whole fallacy is, when Sri Aurobindo is discussing about the divine and the undivine, he tells this Upanishadic story that when Indra and Virochana went to Brahman and said, I want to get the knowledge, or not the Brahman, the Rishi. The Rishi gave each of them a mirror. The Virochana, he saw his face in the mirror, some say he saw his face in the waters. But his reflection, he thought it to be the reality. Whereas Indra, when he looked into the waters, he saw his image, his reflection. But when he disturbed the waters, he saw his own face was vanished. It got disfigured. So then he said, this cannot be the truth. This reflection of mine in the world cannot be the truth. So then he goes back to the Rishi and says, the reflection cannot be truth. Whereas Virochana, who saw the reflection, think that is the truth, and he was happy that I found the truth. And what is the truth? Myself. But Indra says, this my outer being cannot be the truth. So there is a greater inner understanding. And then the Rishi explains, look, the truth is that there is only one consciousness, what they call the Brahman, or what we call in the Gita the Purushottama. And those who think and are under this understanding that they are different from Purushottama are undivine. As simple as that. So in a way we are all undivine creatures, because we all think that we are separate from Purushottama. We all think that we are individualities quite away from Brahman. And what is the divine consciousness? One that knows and realizes that I am not separate from the divine. Because how can there be separation from the divine? Because there is only one consciousness. It's there here or there in the animal or the snake or the butterfly or the human being. So there is only one consciousness. So when we realize this oneness of consciousness, that is the highest state. That all our ignorance comes to a naught when we realize the oneness of the divine. I mean, that's a high level of consciousness. I mean, pretty much very close to the supramental consciousness. But these great yogis who have realized this oneness are the great ones. But we, in our ignorance, in our pride, in our egoism, we still think of our names and our careers and our achievements and our backgrounds, our biodatas, and I have achieved. So that is the whole problem. So Sri Aurobindo is telling us that Lord says ultimately it is only one Purushottama of whom Prakriti is the instrument, and of Prakriti you are the instrument. You see how it goes in a hierarchy. Purushottama, nature, and the man. So this is the hierarchy. So the Lord works through His nature in you. So ultimately the Lord is working in me, but through His own direct instrument of Prakriti or the nature or His Shakti. So this is the way that all these things ultimately are done by Purushottama himself. It is we who separate the Purushottama and ourselves, and therefore we are in ignorance. The day we say no, we are the Purushottama, you are the realized person. But also let's not be like the person, as Sri Ramakrishna said, the famous story of the elephant and the man who confronted the elephant. When Sri Ramakrishna said, all of us are Brahman, then when he was going on the path, the elephant came. The person who was controlling the elephant, he said, hey, move from the path. He said, why should I move? I am the Brahman. And he was there facing the elephant. And the elephant, what does it do? It lifted up the man with his trunk and threw him off 10 meters away. He comes to the Guru and says, hey Guru, you said I am Brahman. Why did the elephant throw me out? He says, realize the Brahman also is the elephant also is the Brahman. And also realize the person who told you to move out from the path is also Brahman. So don't think that you alone are Brahman. That's again a fallacy. So you have to realize that all this is verily Brahman. That is the fullness. Otherwise, if you go around shouting that I am the Brahman, then our Nehru Street prison is not too far. You will be locked up there. And says, he is a Brahman. We'll all go and have his darshan in the prison, not in any ashram. So that is the egoistic Brahman. You think that you are the Brahman, others are not the Brahman. Yeah? So that's where we have to be careful. So he says, this great Purushottama declares himself to be the one who is the Prakriti, who is the foundation, the master, the Lord of all this manifestation and of all his creatures, and the one who has created this Kurukshetra, and the one who has already killed all these Kauravas, and the one who has absorbed all those people into himself, because there is nothing else. I mean, the whole simple logic is there is nothing else apart from Purushottama. He is the warrior, he is the war, he is the killed, he is the killer, he is the arrow, he is the everything. But it is our ignorance that we separate all this. So he says, and Prakriti is only his executive force. The disciple has to rise beyond this force, and his three modes are gunas. He has to become Trigunatita. Not to her has he to surrender his actions, over which he has no longer any claim or right, but into the being of the Supreme. reposing his mind and understanding, heart and will in him, with self-knowledge, with God knowledge, with world knowledge, with a perfect equality, a perfect devotion and absolute self-giving, he has to do works as an offering to the Master of all self-energizings and all sacrifice. Identified in will, conscious with that consciousness, that shall decide and initiate the action. This is the solution which the divine teacher offers to the disciple. So this is a beautiful summary. The summary is that as a doer, we said you offer yourself to the divine. So the question is, you don't offer yourself to nature, which is the immediate kind of the immediate, the creator. We offer ourselves directly to the Supreme, to the Purushottama. And there it says, reposing his mind and understanding, heart and will in him, with a perfect equality, he has to do works as an offering to the Master of all self-energizings and all sacrifice. So this is what we have seen, and we have repeated this many times, that the simple philosophy of the Gita is just these 3 steps, and we have to move from one to the other on a bridge that is called surrender. What the supreme word of the Gita is Mahavakya. We have not to seek. For the Gita itself declares it in its last utterance, the crowning note of the great diapason. With the Lord in thy heart take refuge with all thy being. By his grace thou shalt attain to the supreme peace and the eternal status. So have I expounded to thee a knowledge more secret than that which is hidden. Further hear the most secret, the supreme word that I shall speak to thee. That this is what I was referring to, that none of these, karmanya devadikaraste, or this what we have here, all this question of sarva karmani or kartavyam karma, all these are preparatory, whereas our Bankim Chatterjee and other philosophers have made them the center, that whatever work you must do, but don't have the attachment to the fruit. All that we have said as Mahavakyas, it says none of them are really Mahavakyas. Why should we say, why should Bankim Chandra say that this is the Mahavakya of Gita? Why should any philosopher or interpreter say that this is the Mahavakya of the Gita, when the Lord himself is telling that this is the Mahavakya of the Gita? This is the simple argument you understand. So we don't take away by our interpretation the essential Mahavakya uttered by the Lord himself, because he says, I give you 3 Mahavakyas, the 3 secrets. We'll come to that. And the last secret, it says, further hear the most secret, the supreme word that I shall speak to thee. Become my-minded, devoted to me. To me do sacrifice and adoration. Infallibly thou shalt come to me, for dear to me art thou. Abandoning all laws of conduct, seek refuge in me alone. I will release thee from all sin. Do not grieve. We know these verses very well, starting with the Manmana Bhava Madbhakta and then the Sarva Dharman Parityajya. Mas Sucha, do not grieve. And Lord says, this is the highest secret I am giving you. So Sri Aurobindo says, let's stick to what the Lord has said. Not what Bankim has said or what this person has said, what that person has said. Why are we looking for some other Mahavakya? So this is the central theme. And of course, I think he will explain it later in some other chapters, but let me just have 5 minutes on that. Become my-minded, Manmana Bhava Madbhakta, my devotee or devoted to me. To me do sacrifice and adoration. How will you become my-minded and my devotee? It's only by working, by thinking of Him. You see, when you become my-minded, for example, if you have somebody whom you love, your children, they're away in America, and you constantly think about them. So somebody comes and says, hey, what are you thinking? Thinking of my children. Today is my grandchild's birthday. And somebody says, I'm thinking of my son-in-law or my daughter-in-law or something. So your mind is constantly stuck with those ideas. So you may be sitting here, but you are living there. Your mind is with them. So similarly, the Lord says, you become my-minded. That means you think about me constantly. And how will you think about me constantly? Not in meditation. In fact, in meditation, you are trying not to think. You are trying to be silent, not to have an active mind. So the best way to have both these things together, my-minded and devoted to me, is work. An offering of the work. Again, we come back to the same thing, because that is the secret. Remember me and offer. So all work done and offered leads you to the my-minded state. Because what are you doing? Because you see, our life today is full of action. You want it or not. I mean, you may say, no, sir, I'm retired, I don't go to my office anymore, I've got no job. But still you are breathing, you are eating, you are going to do some puja, you are watching a TV, you are talking to your friends, you are going to an entertainment. You may not have a job, but you are still acting. But all this TV entertainment, or talking to people, or having a party, or having this, or having that, all that can be offered. So offering, the meaning of offering is what? Remembering. And the meaning of remembering is what? Connecting. And the meaning of connection is what? Becoming my-minded. So you see, the simple path is very pragmatic. We are not asking you to go to the temple every day, or to the church every day, or to the mosque every week. Nothing of that. In fact, they need be done at all. Because your church, your temple, your mosque is now and here within. So you are carrying the church within you, you are carrying the Godhead within you. So you are carrying the deity to whom you offer is within you. So that is what Sri Krishna is telling at the end. That now, oh my dear Arjuna, become my-minded, devoted to me, do sacrifice and adoration. You see this beautiful word, adoration. When you love the divine, you must adore Him. Not just say, hi, how are you, and I've come to say a good morning to you, Lord. There is an adoration, is a burning of your own heart. I mean, like great Mirabai, like the great Andal. That was the adoration that really overflowed their heart. There's beautiful songs. We may not be able to sing and write poetry. But even to put a little agarbatti, or little mala, or one little flower at her feet, is to adore with your heart. So now you see these external gestures of putting flower and agarbatti and candle become meaningful as expressions of your adoration, not as puja. Please remember, I'm not doing puja of the mother of Sri Aurobindo. I am doing an act of adoration that's spontaneously coming out of me. So that he says, do thou adoration and then sacrifice. Infallibly thou shalt come to me. Infallibly, remember, unmistakably, if you do this, you will come to me. For dear to me art thou. Abandoning all laws of conduct, seek refuge in me alone. I will release thee from all sin. You see, normally, this word sin should not be used in Indian context. Indian philosophy doesn't have the word sin. But this Lord is telling, I will release thee from all sin, because Arjuna had said that I will have the sin and the papa. So using his own terminology, Lord is saying, do not worry. All that you have said about sin and papa and all the immoral things that will happen to you and to the society, all that I'll take care of. I'll release thee from all this. And ma sucha, do not grieve. And that I suppose is the fondest touch of the divine. The most humane, saying, do not worry, I'm with you. Do not grieve. So after this wonderful message, then we see that's the end of the Gita. But you see, that comes only at the end of the Gita. So what Sri Aurobindo wants to tell us in this chapter is, rest of the whole Gita is only a preparation. What the Lord has said about the 3 Vakyas, the 3 secrets are these. And the highest secret is this. Guhyataram, he says. The most secret, the greatest secret is this, that become my-minded and offer yourself to me, and I will release thee from all sin. And also sin is from this lower consciousness of ignorance. Not sin in the sense of papam and punyam. Because papam and punyam, sin and virtue, they belong to the mental consciousness. So he says, I will release thee from sin. From this mental consciousness, I'll take you above and beyond. You will not be in this consciousness where you would be attacked by this morality and ethical things and religious things. You will be beyond. And he says, I guarantee thee, do not grieve. Well, now comes the last summary paragraph. The argument of the Gita resolves itself into 3 great steps. Now, this is summary of what we have talked about, so you will see now. It's easy to understand. The argument of the Gita resolves itself into 3 great steps by which action rises out of the human into the divine plane, leaving the bondage of the lower for the liberty of a higher law. Number 1, first, by the renunciation of desire and a perfect equality of works have to be done as a sacrifice by man as the doer. A sacrifice to a deity who is the supreme and only self, though by him not yet realized in his own being. So first step, the renunciation of desire and a perfect equality of works have to be done as a sacrifice by man as the doer. First step, you are the doer. But as a doer also try to withdraw from a bit of this ego, this desire, this selfishness, and this kind of, and then try to offer. Secondly, this is the initial step. Secondly, not only the desire of the fruit, but the claim to be the doer of works has to be renounced in the realization of the self as the equal, the inactive, the immutable principle, and of all works as simply the operation of the universal force of the nature soul, Prakriti, the unequal, active, mutable power. We have seen this second step also. The first step we said is the doer, doing without desire, and try not to get the desire for the fruit of your action. Why is it that we don't want the fruit of action? Because I'm trying to lessen my doer sense. I accept I'm the doer, but when I'm getting into this yoga, I'm trying less and less to be the doer, and therefore I'm trying less and less to be attached to the fruit of the work. Second level, he says, not only the desire for the fruit of the work, but then you say, the works are also not mine. I'm not the doer at all. Somebody else is the doer. And that somebody else, we say in the beginning, as we said already, there's the nature soul or Prakriti or some mutable power. Lastly, the Supreme Self has to be seen as the Supreme Purusha, governing this Prakriti, of whom the soul in nature is a partial manifestation, by whom all works are directed in a perfect transcendence through nature. To him, love and adoration and the sacrifice of works have to be offered. The whole being has to be surrendered to Him, and the whole consciousness raised up to dwell in this divine consciousness, so that the human soul may share in His divine transcendence of nature and of His works and act in a perfect spiritual liberty. Well, we have seen the third step is a step when we come to know that it is the Purushottama who is the doer, who is the enjoyer. So once we realize that, to Him we offer our love and adoration and our sacrifice of works. And as it says, the whole being has to be surrendered to Him and the whole consciousness raised up to dwell in this divine consciousness. You see, what happens in this process, of course I have explained it before, that by giving and surrendering, what is happening? We are surrendering our lower nature to the higher. That means all the muck that is there, all the resistance that is there, all the problems that are there, we are giving it up to the Lord. And then by that giving up the lower, there is a taking over by the higher. So it's a simultaneous process. You are emptying the cup of the lower nature, and into that empty cup is pouring the higher nature and the higher consciousness. So this is a simultaneous movement. If you don't empty the cup, don't expect the divine to pour in force. If you have all the mental notions and prejudices and all the anger and all the lust and all these things, and my cup is full, even if you adore the Lord, Lord will say, where do I come in? I don't have a place in you. You are all so full of yourself. Give me place to come and abide. So we have to empty ourselves. That emptiness is the process of surrendering, offering. So all our prejudices, all our mental confusions and our ambitions and everything is at His feet. So this is the message. And into this message, Sri Aurobindo gives three beautiful names. The first step is Karma Yoga. The selfless sacrifice of works. That means as the doer, you are doing the Karma Yoga. And here the Gita's insistence is on action. The second is Jnana Yoga. The self-realization and knowledge of the true nature of the self and the world. And here the insistence is on knowledge. But the sacrifice of works continues, and the path of works becomes one with, but does not disappear into the path of knowledge. The last step is Bhakti Yoga. Adoration and seeking of the Supreme Self as the Divine Being. And here the insistence is on devotion. But the knowledge is not subordinated, only raised, vitalized and fulfilled. And still the sacrifice of works continues. The double path becomes the triune way of knowledge, works and devotion. And the fruit of the sacrifice, the one fruit still placed before the seeker, is attained. Union with the Divine Being and oneness with the Supreme Divine Nature. So this is a marvelous summary that the three steps of the Gita are nothing but the three steps of Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga and Bhakti Yoga. But you see how Sri Aurobindo brings in the synthesis. So Gita is not Bhakti Yoga alone or Jnana Yoga alone or Karma Yoga alone. There are steps, one leading to the other. The first step, as we said, is Karma Yoga because we are all working. And this work offered brings you knowledge. Knowledge of what? That I am not the doer, it's the Prakriti which is the doer. And continuing further, then you get into Bhakti Yoga. So let's not think that just because we have adoration of the Divine Mother or we love the Sri Krishna or we surrender to the Lord, that you should sacrifice Jnana Yoga and Karma Yoga. And also we see here a wonderful thing. You see, it's only in the end, 18th chapter, Lord Krishna says, become my-minded, manmana bhava. That means, he says, now you become my bhakta. Before that he said, you become a karma yogin, do my works. Then he says, become a jnana yogin. So it's by karma that you increase bhakti. It is by jnana that you increase bhakti. You see, now if you want to be a devotee of Mother and Sri Aurobindo, you cannot just become a devotee without doing anything for them, without knowing them. So bhakti by itself is good. You can start, it's just a little deepam. It'll just flicker, it'll just go on like that. But it will have many doubts. So with the first wind of doubt, your bhakti may vanish. So to keep up the flame against the storms of doubts and debates of the mind, you need Jnana Yoga. And to keep this Jnana Yoga up, you need to do Karma Yoga. So the whole thing is, bhakti comes ultimately. And bhakti comes through working for the divine. So that's why, friends, we always say, let us work for the mother. And working for the mother, well, we know all that. Maybe some other time we'll expand that. So most important is working any kind of work, all kind of works, because I'm here a worker. I have no choice. And in the eyes of the divine, all works are the same. To be a director or a sweeper or a manager or a company executive, all works are the same because all works offered to the divine have the same value. So there's nothing big or small in the Lord's eyes. To be a king or a shoemaker is the same thing for Him. So all works we should take up with the same importance, with the same equality, saying, oh, I'm a boss here, why should I go and sweep the garden? That means you are egoistic. Your ego is coming in front. So take up every work that comes your way, and all those works offer. And then from there, the more you work for the mother, the more you love her. The more you love her, the more your knowledge of the mother increases. The more your knowledge of the mother increases, the more your love increases. The more your love increases, the more you want to work for her. So this is the inalienable link, inseparable oneness of this trinity of the path. And this is brought out only by Sri Aurobindo. For the first time, after Lord Krishna said, now we have the great avatar Sri Aurobindo, who can reveal this because he has realized Sri Krishna himself. He is not speaking philosophy. In fact, as all of us know, Sri Krishna himself came into Sri Aurobindo. So that is the identity of consciousness with which Sri Aurobindo has written this book. It is not just essays. It is transcription of Sri Krishna's own consciousness once again. That was called the Bhagavad Gita. This is called the Essays on the Gita. But the consciousness that spoke and that wrote are one and the same. Therefore, we see once again the fullness of the Gita that comes out in Sri Aurobindo. Yeah? So we have just completed chapter 4. Tomorrow we shall take up chapter 5.